Hey everybody, Andrew here. Don't you just love videos that start with pictures of the Great Pyramid? I do. So today, I just want to make one last introductory video for you guys, just giving you all an idea of where I stand on some of these more sensational ideas. Maybe some of the guys in my subscription list you might have checked out, and you might have found that some of them invoke aliens and other supernatural forces. Other guys are pretty grounded, pretty, pragmatic, scientific, pretty based research. And you guys probably want to know where I stand in all this. So I'm going to show you a couple things today that might give you an idea of where I'm coming from. Maybe give you some new perspectives on some things. Some things maybe you've never thought about before. And let's start with the Great Pyramid. This is a good one. Everybody has theories for the Great Pyramid. Matter of fact, SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, just had a great video that talks about the alignment and how the alignment to Orion's belt is not as accurate as everyone's saying it is, and we might not be able to use that correlation as evidence. Another thing that I want to bring up about the Great Pyramid that I might be onto something here. Al-Mamun's breach. This, not many people know the name of or what the association is. This is the so-called forced entrance into the Great Pyramid. Now, I only know of one person on the internet who says that this feature of the pyramid was original, and that's Great Giza Pyramid. He thinks that it might have been altered by later peoples, but that this portion of the pyramid, this channel, was actually part of the original design. And if this is true, this calls into question the entire Al-Mamun narrative and the original re-entering of the pyramid by the later rediscoverers. Now, everyone says they came in through the forced passage, around the plug blocks, and up the ascending passage. And to do this, they would have to have enlarged a large area of rock and bored their way down and removed all this rubble using, I believe, water and fire and picks, and it would have to be hard tools. You can't just do this with bronze tools. This would have to be iron tools like Al-Mamun had. That's why, allegedly, it wasn't achieved before this time. But what I propose, and what some other people have proposed, is that the original entrance, which is just right next to it, it's just a few courses over and a few courses up, and it's obvious. It's right there smack in the middle of the pyramid. We think the original entrance was always known. And if the original entrance was always known, this changes everything. This means the original rediscoverers, whoever they were, whenever they were, perhaps a lot earlier than we suspect, were able to come down the descending passage all the way to the bottom. And they would have been able to explore the subterranean chamber without any forcing their way in. If this was all open, or if there was a swinging door, like they say, that you could just push and would open, you would need no technology or forcing to get into it. You could just slide right down. And when you got to the bottom, and you've explored the pit and the subterranean chamber, and found that there's nothing in there, maybe there was something in there, but now there was not, you would be drawn to the lower portion of the well shaft. From here, all it would take is an intrepid climber to scramble up to the grotto. We don't know what the original configuration of the grotto was. Now we know that it's accessible by climbers. It's been accessed that way in the past. If they were able to get to this point, they more than likely were able to get the rest of the way up. And up here, at the junction, there is a damaged portion of masonry. And this masonry appears from the damage to have been done from inside the well shaft, thus implying that there were people inside the well shaft breaking into the grand gallery and the upper chambers. Now, if this is true, this changes the whole narrative of what we've been taught. Now, once the rediscoverers have made it up to this point, they had access to the entire upper structure. They could have taken things out, taken it down, back through the well shaft, back down, and back up the descending passage. But if there was something big in the pyramid, something valuable maybe, something really important that they wanted to take out, that they couldn't get back down the well shaft and the grotto, what's the only other way that they could get something out? They would have to bring it over to the ascending passage, down, and then they would have to go around the plug blocks, the other direction. Now, if Great Giza Pyramid is correct, and this was an original feature of the pyramid, say a small conduit, a small channel, it could have been enlarged more easily than just blind cutting. They would have something to follow, and the spoils would be pushed down into the pit and the subterranean chamber, as we see. And something could have been taken out of the pyramid that was too large to go down the well shaft or the grotto. So what this implies, you can get into the Ark of the Covenant, and I've read Graham Hancock's Sign and the Seal. I'm very interested in the subject of the Ark of the Covenant, and I like his hypothesis that either it or a legacy of the Ark is in Ethiopia. There are many strange things in Ethiopia. So I think that story has merit, and we should follow that. Also, I've read Christopher Dunn's Giza power plant, and I like some of the ideas in that book and some of his observations, but he implies a lot of technology that is not present in the structure. He implies a whole structure in the Queen's chamber that is not there. So I'm not sure how far to take the power plant hypothesis, but the idea of it being a machine or an energetic structure, I think, has merit, and it just requires more investigation at this point. We just do not have enough information. We do not have high enough quality footage of the inside of the structure, and we have not had adequate access to the structure. So the claims that have been made they've gone beyond what we are able to calculate at this point. So that's as far as I want to take the Great Pyramid. Now, let's go outside to the rest of Giza. Let's have a look at that. I found some really good old photos here. Look at this. Look at these blocks. Look at the size of these blocks. Look how eroded they are. Look how less eroded they become as they get lower. These obviously are granite casing stones. Here, here. All the limestone, heavily eroded. Here, granite. Much of it's missing. Do we know the function of this structure? Do we know the original shape of this structure? I'd say over 50% of this structure is missing. So, how are we to infer function, purpose, or dimensions from what we see here? It hasn't even fully been excavated in this photo, and the theory was probably already established This is the Sphinx temple. This is the temple for the Sphinx. But was it? Let's look at some other things. I like this photo. This is a nice big photo. Panoramic. Shows the Sphinx temple. And the Khafre mortuary temple, whatever you want to call it, right next door. It's the same essential structure. All made out of the same blocks. Some of these upper blocks may have been repositioned. You see a lot of them laying in the foreground that haven't been repositioned. You can tell some of the lower blocks are still fitted pretty well, and more than likely are in their original locations. But then in other instances you have large overhangs and strange chisel marks, and the weathering doesn't line up. But when the weathering lines up across blocks, you know that the stones weathered together and that they sat there in their original locations and weathered there. Like here, for example, they weather across the block. And this is a polygonal wall. That's why it stayed together. The weathering is similar across the blocks, showing that they are still presumably in situ from their first positioning and during the first constructions. Now this thing, we can get into some huge arguments over this thing. What I will say right now is, I want to say the statue of the Sphinx was originally Anubis, the dog god of the Egyptian mythology. Why I say this? Because of Robert Temple's work, because of Chuck at CFAP 7865's work. I think they have a very compelling case for the original statue being a member of the pantheon of gods of the mythology of this culture that inhabited the region. From there, I go maybe a little out of bounds for some people, and I say the original structure was not a statue. The paws, the rear, the tail, it's all blocks. Everything that makes it look like an animal is blocks. The underlying eroded bedrock structure that matches the erosion of the blocks of the temple and the enclosure, I believe, was a functional, purpose-built structure, not a symbolic statue. Now, we know the Sphinx is full of holes. It has a tunnel on this side. It has a tunnel on top of the head. It has the presumed tunnel in between the paws that is under the boardwalk. We do not have any footage of that, but that's a pretty good hypothesis there. That seems likely. Whether or not they found anything, there is definitely some clandestine excavations going on in Egypt, and that's a pretty good way to cover up what they're doing. Put a boardwalk over the front. Those blocks in front of the paws, they do look old, and they do look like they could be covering something. The rest is bedrock. It's very, very compelling. But again, I say the Sphinx structure, the bedrock structure, is full of holes, heavily eroded, and I don't believe was originally built to be a statue. I think it was a functional, purpose-built structure, which more than likely tied into the function, whatever it was, we do not know, of the entire complex. Now, in the left background of this picture, you'll see what's known as the Khinkawes mastaba. This is an interesting feature. It's really close in proximity to the more famous monuments, but no one talks about it. Some people call it the fourth pyramid, or the lost pyramid, but it wasn't ever a pyramid. It was a bedrock structure, similar to the Sphinx, with some blocks stacked on top later. And then you'll see this little protrusion right here. And this feature of the complex doesn't even have a name. It only has a formal designation, GCF1. Giza Complex Formation 1, I believe, is what it stands for. You'll have to ask Mark Lehner or read his article on it. In that article, he shows that this feature, here, I'll show you a better picture of it. This feature obviously has the same weathering patterns as the Sphinx, and more than likely is the same age as the Sphinx. Now look at this thing. It's riddled with holes. It's heavily eroded. Here's the mastaba of Khinkawis on the right. It has blocks over its bedrock core. But here we see the bedrock core itself exposed and how eroded it is. Look at these windows and doors. The cornice, you can barely make them out anymore. They've almost become geological features again. They're not carved out anymore. They've returned to being organic and natural looking. You have to squint really hard to see the architecture and the carving that was done to this for its original shape and dimensions. Now, look at the outcropping of the top. Doesn't that remind you of the neck of the Sphinx and the harder, crusty upper layers of limestone that are more resilient, a harder layer, so they eroded slower. This all supposedly is wind erosion or water erosion. You could make the case that this is also undulating like the enclosure of the Sphinx. So what are we looking at here? Are we looking at a second Sphinx? Now, not to get sensational, a lot of people are claiming that they find the second Sphinx. But I don't claim that this was ever a Sphinx. I claim that this was what the Sphinx once looked like before it was converted into a statue. I think that this structure, GCF1, either identically or maybe just similar, maybe it was just another additional structure of the complex. But they are the same age, and they are of the same construction project. Okay, so here's an overhead shot just to orient you guys. The Sphinx, the temples, and this is the Khinkawis mastaba and GCF1. So what I am proposing is that there was a previous civilization, previous culture before the dynastic Egyptians, before the pre-dynastic Egyptians, that were completely separate and perhaps didn't have any ornamentation. That was just everything was completely functional and pragmatic, with almost no ornamentation. Maybe just architectural ornamentation, classical styles like cornices and arches and geometry, basically sacred geometry. So I won't go too far down the rabbit holes here, but I definitely believe that the original builders of the complex, which is what I'm going to call it, and a few other people call it this as well, the original builders are entirely separate from the Egyptian culture. And to look at these structures through their cultural lens is incorrect. We might be able to infer a lot by their mythology about the structures, maybe from what they found in the structures in the past. But we cannot base their cultural system on these structures. The builders of these structures have their own distinct culture and reasons for building, and it's why we can tell them apart. Everything is so pragmatic and so functional, yet so impressively big at the same time. So that's as far as I'll go with pyramids and Giza right now. But let's just say, look at this. Look at the blocks. Look how much of it is blocks. Look how many generations of blocks. The bedrock structure was something else entirely. Now, for example, the weighing of the heart ceremony. This is a good example of Egyptian mythology and perhaps deeper meanings that we can infer about the original structures that we may have overlooked. So, for example, Anubis, the dog god, protector of the underworld, lord of Rostau. We know the symbolism, we know the mythology, and in this depiction we see the Sphinx, or a depiction of the Sphinx, a structure with a head, and it's inside the scale along with Anubis. And if he's not represented inside the scale, say, for example, this depiction, you see Anubis on top of the box. Now, what I believe this represents is Anubis on his platform as the Sphinx. And in the older depiction, Anubis, or maybe this is later, but Anubis with the Sphinx, with the structure of the Sphinx. They are tied together. They are linked. That's why they are depicted together. So I think there's a very high probability that the statue was once a dog, and then later was probably destroyed by one or several conquering armies and cultures, and probably converted one or several times. So what we look at now is a very bastardized and very recycled monument. So I think there could be something to this whole scale symbolism and perhaps a remembrance of something older. So I don't claim to know for sure, but I think that there may be a compelling case for the Sphinx being a functional structure, perhaps similar to some kind of scale. And that is how the symbolism and the mythology came to be. The structure was rediscovered in a ruined state, and the symbolism and mythology was created around it by the people who came to inhabit the area. So that's all I'll say about the Sphinx right now. I'm sure a lot of people are already mad, and I probably said a lot of this wrong, but that's where I'm going to start with this. Now, going further afield, across the rest of the world, I think we see hallmarks of the same megalithic builders, and I don't know any other classification for them or any other identifying hallmarks other than what we see left for us in the stone. I believe any mythology, any cultural legacies that we have cannot be fully trusted, and that the only true incorruptible evidence that we have is the stone ruins that are left to us. So let's go over some of the hallmarks real quick before we close up. The nubs on the blocks. Everybody knows about the nubs on the blocks. Everybody knows about the crazy polygonal walls of Cusco, Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, Pisac. They know about the huge size of these blocks and their strange molded appearance. But I want to show you all today one other feature of these builders that a lot of people have left out, and we're gonna do formal presentations and introductions for this research. I'm still trying to figure all this out, and it's going to all culminate in an article for Graham Hancock's website. What I want to present is the bevel block. The bevel block is a very important feature that a lot of people have overlooked, and they just dismiss it as a stoneworking technique. And I think that there's more to it than that. I think it's not just a stonemason's decoration. I think that there's this is a sign of processing. This is evidence of high technology processing. And when we start going down this rabbit hole, we're going into Brian Forrester's work. Now, Brian Forrester invokes aliens due to his Paracas skull investigations and research. I do not claim to be any kind of expert in any of that. I think the skulls are fascinating, and I think they might be a distinct subspecies of human. Beyond that, I don't claim to know anything. So I am not going to invoke extraterrestrials at this point, but I do believe in a high lost civilization with high lost ancient technology. And I believe one of the hallmarks, along with the nubs, the polygonal building style, the massive sizes, the square holes, I think another hallmark is the bevel block. And we see these as the foundations of many sites around the world. And we just dismiss them as a normal block. But I believe there's much more going on with these blocks than anyone has ever has bothered to notice. Except maybe Freemasons or other secretive stonemason guilds. Groups that may have traveled the world looking for these sites. Another rabbit hole we don't have to go down today. It's several videos in and of itself. But I believe that there is a hallmark at every ancient site that's famous in the ancient alternative history community. The ruins of South America, the ruins of Turkey and Lebanon and Greece and Jordan and Syria, Jerusalem, Egypt, even France, Italy, all across Europe and Asia, we see hallmarks of a similar building style from a connected or single culture. Who they were, when they were, we do not know. But they were a long time ago, and they could do great things. And we're only now beginning to find out who they really were. Thank you guys. I hope to have more formal and explanatory videos in the future. This one was just off the top of my head, but gives you an idea of my thought process, some of the ideas I entertain, and some of the ones that I don't entertain. But what's most important is you do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and only follow the best evidence that you find, and only listen to the most honest, earnest researchers that are presenting information. Thank you guys. Talk to you next time.